The morning sun painted golden streaks across the private airfield as Maya Chun adjusted her worn leather jacket and walked toward the gleaming corporate jet. Her heart pounded, but not from nervousness about flying. She had been flying planes since she was 16, thanks to her grandfather who had been a pilot in the war. What made her nervous was the man standing beside the aircraft, surrounded by his group of wealthy friends, all laughing at some joke she was sure was about her. Alexander Blackwood was everything Maya despised about the rich elite. At 28, he had inherited his father's aviation empire and turned it into a global powerhouse. His tailored suit probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months working as a mechanic at the small airport on the other side of town. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his green eyes held the kind of arrogance that came from never being told no. Maya had only ended up at this exclusive charity event because her friend Jessica worked as a waitress for the catering company. Jessica had begged her to come along and help serve drinks, promising good tips from the wealthy guests. Maya needed the money desperately. Her grandmother's medical bills were piling up, and the small apartment they shared was behind on rent. The charity auction had been going smoothly until Alexander Blackwood noticed her. Maya had been refilling champagne glasses when she accidentally bumped into him, spilling a few drops on his expensive watch. Instead of being gracious about the small accident, he had made a scene. "Do you even know how much this watch costs?" he had said loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. "Probably more than you make in a year." Maya had apologized sincerely, but Alexander wasn't finished. He seemed to enjoy having an audience as he continued to embarrass her in front of his friends and the other wealthy guests. "I bet you've never even been on a plane, let alone know how to fly one," he had said with a cruel smile. "People like you just dream about the kind of life people like me live." That comment had hit Maya harder than he could have known. Flying wasn't just her passion, it was her escape, her freedom, her connection to the grandfather who had raised her after her parents died. She had spent countless hours in old planes, learning every instrument, every procedure, dreaming of the day she could afford her own aircraft. Alexander's friends had laughed at his comment, and Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had wanted to walk away, to ignore the arrogant billionaire and finish her job. But then, he had made the challenge that would change both their lives forever. "You know what?" Alexander had said, gesturing toward his private jet visible through the large windows of the event hall. "I'll make you a deal. If you can fly my plane successfully, prove that you're not just some waitress pretending to know about aviation, I'll marry you. But when you fail, you'll admit that you're nothing more than hired help who should stick to serving drinks." The entire room had gone quiet. Maya felt hundreds of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to such an insulting challenge. Alexander's friends were already chuckling, assuming she would back down in embarrassment. But Maya surprised everyone, including herself, by straightening her shoulders and looking Alexander directly in his arrogant green eyes. "I accept your challenge," she had said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent room. The shock on Alexander's face had been worth every moment of the embarrassment he had put her through. He clearly hadn't expected her to call his bluff. "You can't be serious," he had stammered, his confident demeanor cracking slightly. "Dead serious," Maya had replied. "But I have conditions too. When I successfully fly your plane, you don't just marry me. You also donate $5 million to the children's hospital your charity event is supposedly supporting. And you publicly apologize for your behavior tonight." Alexander had hesitated, looking around at the crowd of people watching the exchange with growing interest. His reputation was on the line now. He couldn't back down without looking like a coward in front of his peers and business associates. "Fine," he had said finally. "But when you crash my plane or chicken out, you'll pay for any damages, and you'll never work at any event in this city again." Maya had agreed, knowing she was taking an enormous risk. Alexander's jet was worth millions of dollars, money she could never hope to repay if something went wrong. But she also knew her skills as a pilot, and she wasn't about to let this arrogant man humiliate her without fighting back. Now, standing beside the sleek aircraft in the morning light, Maya felt the weight of what she had agreed to. News of the challenge had spread quickly through social media overnight. Reporters and photographers were gathering at the edge of the airfield, eager to capture whatever was about to happen. Alexander approached her with his usual swagger, but Maya could see uncertainty in his eyes. He was beginning to realize that his impulsive challenge might have been a mistake. "Last chance to back out," he said, trying to sound casual. "No one would blame you for admitting you're in over your head." Maya ignored his comment and walked around the aircraft, conducting a thorough pre-flight inspection. She checked the exterior for any damage, examined the landing gear, and verified that all external components were secure. Her movements were confident and professional, the result of years of training and experience. Alexander watched her with growing surprise. Whatever he had expected, it wasn't this level of competence. Maya clearly knew her way around an aircraft. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his mocking tone replaced by genuine curiosity. "My grandfather taught me," Maya replied without looking at him. She was focused on checking the fuel levels and engine intakes. "He was a pilot in Vietnam. Started teaching me when I was a kid." Alexander fell silent, watching as Maya completed her inspection with the thoroughness of an experienced pilot. When she was satisfied with the exterior condition of the aircraft, she moved toward the cabin door. The interior of the jet was more luxurious than anything Maya had ever seen. Leather seats, polished wood panels, and state-of-the-art entertainment systems filled the spacious cabin. But Maya wasn't interested in the luxury. She was focused on reaching the cockpit. The flight deck of Alexander's jet was a marvel of modern aviation technology. Digital displays showed every aspect of the aircraft's systems, and the controls were more advanced than anything Maya had trained on. But the fundamental principles were the same, and she quickly oriented herself with the layout. Alexander climbed into the co-pilot's seat, watching as Maya settled into the pilot's position and began her pre-flight checklist. Her hands moved over the instruments with confidence, checking systems and preparing for takeoff. "You actually know what you're doing," he said, and for the first time since Maya had met him, there was no mockery in his voice. "Did you think I would accept your challenge if I didn't?" Maya asked, continuing her preparations. Alexander didn't answer. The truth was, he had assumed she was bluffing, that she would back down when faced with the reality of flying a multi-million-dollar aircraft. He had never imagined that the young woman he had dismissed as just a waitress would actually be qualified to pilot his jet. Maya completed her checklist and requested clearance from the tower. Her radio communication was crisp and professional, using the proper phraseology that came only from real experience. Alexander listened in amazement as she handled all the pre-flight procedures with the skill of a commercial pilot. As they taxied toward the runway, Maya felt her nervousness fade away. This was her element, her passion, the place where she felt most confident and alive. The fact that she was flying a state-of-the-art corporate jet instead of her grandfather's old Cessna didn't change the fundamental joy she felt at the controls of an aircraft. Alexander remained quiet during taxi, but Maya could feel his eyes on her, studying her every move. The arrogant billionaire who had challenged her was discovering that the woman he had tried to humiliate was far more than she appeared to be. The tower cleared them for takeoff, and Maya advanced the throttles smoothly. The powerful engines responded immediately, and the jet began its acceleration down the runway. Maya felt the familiar thrill as the aircraft lifted off the ground and began climbing into the clear morning sky. Once they reached cruising altitude, Maya engaged the autopilot and turned to face Alexander. His expression was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been respect. "So," she said calmly, "where would you like me to fly your plane, Mr. Blackwood?" Alexander stared at her for a long moment before responding. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Maya raised an eyebrow. "That's not what we agreed on. You owe me a public apology, $5 million to the Children's Hospital, and..." She paused, suddenly, realizing the full implications of what they had wagered, apparently a wedding. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their agreement. Both of them were beginning to understand that what had started as an impulsive challenge born from wounded pride had become something much more complicated. Alexander looked out at the clouds below them, his mind racing. He had built his business empire through careful planning and calculated risks. He never acted impulsively, never made agreements he couldn't easily escape from. But last night, his ego had gotten the better of him, and now he was facing consequences he had never anticipated. Maya, meanwhile, was trying to process her own situation. She had proven her point, shown the arrogant billionaire that he had seriously underestimated her. But now what? She had agreed to marry a man she barely knew, a man who had publicly humiliated her just hours before. The flight continued in relative silence, both of them lost in their thoughts. Maya handled the aircraft expertly, making small course corrections and monitoring the weather ahead. Alexander watched her work, gradually realizing that his initial assessment of her had been completely wrong. As they began their descent back toward the airport, Alexander finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me you were a pilot?" he asked. Maya glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the landing approach. "You didn't ask," she said simply. "You just assumed you knew everything about me based on the fact that I was serving drinks at your charity event." Alexander winced at the truth in her words. He had made assumptions based on nothing more than prejudice and arrogance, and those assumptions had led him into a situation he never could have imagined. The landing was smooth and professional, with Maya bringing the jet down gently on the runway. As they taxied back toward the terminal, both of them could see the crowd of reporters and photographers that had gathered to witness the outcome of their challenge. Maya parked the aircraft and shut down the engines, completing her post-flight checklist with the same thoroughness she had shown throughout the flight. When she was finished, she turned to Alexander with a slight smile. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, it looks like you owe me a wedding." The media frenzy that followed the successful flight was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Cameras flashed constantly as reporters shouted questions, trying to understand how a waitress had managed to fly a billionaire's private jet and win such an unusual wager. Maya found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never wanted, while Alexander stood beside her looking pale and shaken. Miss Chun, how did you learn to fly?" one reporter called out. "Mr. Blackwood, will you really honor the marriage agreement?" another shouted. Alexander stepped forward, his business training helping him maintain composure despite the chaos of the situation. "I'll be making a full statement later today," he said firmly. "For now, I can confirm that Miss Chin successfully completed the flight challenge, and I will honor all terms of our agreement." Maya watched him with surprise. She had expected him to try to find some way out of their deal, but he seemed genuinely committed to keeping his word. Perhaps there was more to Alexander Blackwood than the arrogant facade he presented to the world. As they made their way through the crowd toward the terminal, Maya caught sight of her friend Jessica pushing through the reporters. Jessica's eyes were wide with disbelief and excitement. "Maya, I can't believe what just happened." Jessica grabbed her arm as soon as she was close enough. "The whole internet is talking about you. There are already memes and everything." Maya felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. All she had wanted was to stand up for herself against Alexander's humiliation. She had never intended to become an internet sensation or find herself engaged to a billionaire she barely knew. Inside the terminal, Alexander's team of lawyers and assistants were already waiting. Maya recognized the efficient, serious-looking group as the type of people who handled the complicated lives of the wealthy. They whisked Alexander away for private discussions, leaving Maya standing alone with Jessica. "What are you going to do?" Jessica asked, still amazed by everything that had happened. Maya sank into a nearby chair, suddenly, feeling exhausted. The adrenaline from the flight was wearing off, and the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. "I don't know," she admitted. "I proved I could fly his plane, but now I'm supposedly engaged to marry him. What kind of marriage would that be?" Jessica sat down beside her. "Maybe he's not as bad as he seemed last night. People say things they don't mean when they're trying to impress their friends." Maya thought about Alexander's behavior during the flight. He had been quiet and respectful, clearly shocked by her abilities. But that didn't erase the cruel way he had treated her at the charity event or the arrogant assumptions he had made about her. An hour later, Alexander returned with his team. He approached Maya with a serious expression, and she could see that the lawyers had been busy preparing documents. "We need to talk," he said simply. Privately, Maya followed him to a small conference room where they could speak without the distraction of reporters and onlookers. Alexander's demeanor had changed completely from the night before. Gone was the mocking arrogance, replaced by something that looked almost like vulnerability. "First, I want to apologize," he began. and Maya could tell that the words didn't come easily to him. My behavior last night was inexcusable. I made assumptions about you that were completely wrong, and I treated you with disrespect that you didn't deserve. Maya studied his face, trying to determine if his apology was genuine or just another calculated move. Thank you, she said carefully. But an apology doesn't change what happened or what we agreed to. Alexander nodded. I know, and I intend to honor our agreement completely. The $5 million is already being transferred to the Children's Hospital. I'll make the public apology at a press conference this afternoon. As for the marriage, he paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him seem more human and less like the polished businessman she had met the night before. As for the marriage, Maya prompted. I have a proposal, Alexander said. Not that kind of proposal, he added quickly when he saw Maya's expression. A business proposal. We both entered into this agreement impulsively, and we're both dealing with consequences we didn't fully consider. But maybe we can make this work for both of us. Maya leaned back in her chair. I'm listening. Alexander pulled out a folder of documents that his lawyers had prepared. I'm suggesting a marriage of convenience. A legal arrangement that benefits both of us, with clear terms and a defined end date. What kind of benefits? Maya asked, suspicious of any deal that seemed too good to be true. For me, this whole situation has actually created an opportunity, Alexander explained. My company has been struggling with its public image lately. We've been seen as too corporate, too disconnected from ordinary people. This story, our marriage, it humanizes the company. It shows that I'm not just another entitled billionaire. Maya raised an eyebrow. So you want to use me for publicity? Not use, Alexander corrected quickly. Partner with. In exchange, you get financial security, opportunities you could never access otherwise, and the chance to pursue your real passion for aviation without worrying about money. Maya was intrigued despite herself. What do you mean? Alexander leaned forward, and for the first time since she had met him, he seemed genuinely excited about something. My company owns a flight training academy. We could get you certified on commercial aircraft, help you build the hours you need for an airline career. You could have access to aircraft worth millions of dollars, the kind of training opportunities that usually require connections and money you don't have. Maya felt her pulse quicken. The offer was tempting beyond belief. She had dreamed of flying commercially, but the cost of advanced training and the difficulty of getting hired without connections had always seemed like insurmountable obstacles. What would you get out of it? She asked. A wife who makes me look like less of an arrogant playboy, Alexander said with a rueful smile. Someone who can help me understand what it's like for people who weren't born into wealth. And, honestly, after watching you fly today, someone I might actually be able to respect. Maya considered his offer carefully. A marriage of convenience wasn't what she had dreamed of, but it wasn't as if she had any other romantic prospects. Her life had been focused entirely on taking care of her grandmother and trying to make ends meet. She had never had time for serious relationships. How long are we talking about? She asked. 2 years, Alexander replied. Long enough to seem legitimate, short enough that we can both move on with our lives afterward. During that time, you'd live in my penthouse, attend social events as my wife, and help me with some business situations where your perspective would be valuable. In return, I pay off your grandmother's medical bills, get you the flight training you want, and provide you with a financial settlement when we divorce. Maya's mind raced. The offer was more generous than she had any right to expect, especially from someone who had been so cruel to her just hours before. But it also felt like she would be selling herself, agreeing to live a lie for money and opportunity. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Alexander nodded. Of course, but I should mention that the media attention isn't going to go away. Whether we go through with the marriage or not, you're going to be in the public eye now. At least this way, you'd have resources to deal with it. As if to emphasize his point, they could hear the buzz of reporters still gathered outside the conference room. Maya realized that Alexander was right. Her life had already changed irrevocably. The question now was how she wanted to handle that change. There would have to be rules, Maya said slowly. Boundaries. This would be strictly a business arrangement. Absolutely, Alexander agreed. We'd each have our own space in the penthouse. No expectations of anything beyond what we agree to in the contract. Maya thought about her grandmother, who was waiting at home for news about the mysterious phone call that had summoned Maya to some kind of emergency at the airport. She thought about the stack of medical bills on their kitchen table and the notice from their landlord about the overdue rent. She thought about her dreams of flying, which had always seemed impossible to achieve. "If I agree to this," she said carefully, "I want to meet with your lawyers separately. I want my own legal representation to review any contract before I sign anything." Alexander smiled, and for the first time, Maya saw genuine approval in his expression. "Smart. I'll arrange for you to meet with one of the top family law attorneys in the city. Someone who doesn't work for me, so you can trust their advice." Maya felt a mixture of fear and excitement as she considered the possibility. Yesterday, she had been a struggling mechanic serving drinks to make extra money. Now she was contemplating marriage to one of the wealthiest men in the country, with opportunities that could transform her entire life. "There's something else," Alexander said hesitantly. "My family. They're going to want to meet you, and they're not going to be easy to deal with. My mother especially has very strong opinions about the kind of woman I should marry." Maya almost laughed. "Let me guess. She was expecting someone from your social circle? Someone with the right pedigree and family connections." "Something like that," Alexander admitted. "But after today, after seeing what you're capable of, I think my opinion about what makes someone worthy of respect has changed considerably." Maya studied his face, trying to read the sincerity in his words. The man sitting across from her seemed genuinely different from the arrogant billionaire who had humiliated her the night before. Whether that change was temporary or real remained to be seen. "I'll need to talk to my grandmother," Maya said finally. "She's the only family I have, and I won't make a decision this big without discussing it with her." Alexander nodded. "Of course. Take whatever time you need. But Maya," he paused, seeming to struggle with his words, "I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about the marriage arrangement, I meant what I said about the apology and the donation. You earned both of those by proving me wrong today." Maya felt a flicker of something that might have been respect for Alexander. Perhaps there was hope that this impossible situation could work out for both of them. As they prepared to leave the conference room and face the waiting reporters, Maya realized that her life was about to become more complicated than she had ever imagined. But for the first time in years, she also felt hopeful about the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage and determination that had carried her through the morning's flight. The press conference that afternoon was a media sensation. Alexander, polished and professional, made his public apology to Maya and announced the donation to the children's hospital. When reporters pressed him about the marriage agreement, he simply stated that he and Maya were taking time to get to know each other before making any final decisions. Maya, standing beside him at the podium, felt overwhelmed by the attention but managed to answer a few questions about her background and flying experience. The story of the waitress who had shocked a billionaire by accepting his challenge was already spreading around the world, making Maya an unlikely celebrity overnight. As they left the press conference together, Alexander turned to Maya with an expression of genuine curiosity. "I have to ask," he said, "what made you accept the challenge? Most people would have just walked away." Maya considered her answer carefully. "You humiliated me in front of all those people," she said finally. "But more than that, you dismissed everything I am, everything I've worked for, based on nothing but your own prejudices. I couldn't let that stand." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "I'm beginning to understand that I have a lot to learn about making assumptions about people," he said. "Maybe that's something you could teach me, if you decide to accept my proposal." Maya's grandmother, Ellen Chun, was waiting in their small kitchen when Maya returned home that evening. At 78, Ellen was still sharp and perceptive, with the kind of wisdom that came from surviving decades of hardship and raising a granddaughter alone after tragedy struck their family. Ellen had already seen the news coverage on her old television set, and her dark eyes were filled with concern as Maya sat down across from her at their worn wooden table. "Tell me everything," Ellen said simply, pouring Maya a cup of tea from the pot she had prepared. Maya began with the charity event, explaining how she had ended up serving drinks and how Alexander's cruel comments had led to the challenge. Ellen listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as Maya described the flight and the media chaos that followed. When Maya finished with Alexander's proposal for a marriage of convenience, Ellen was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she had heard. "This man," Ellen said finally, "he sounds like someone who has never learned that money cannot buy respect or character." "I think you're right," Maya agreed. "But, Grandma, he's offering to pay for your medical treatments. All of them. And he's offering me opportunities one could never afford otherwise." Ellen reached across the table and took Maya's hand. "Child, I have lived through poverty, war, and loss. I know the value of financial security. But I also know the price of selling your soul for it." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not selling my soul. It would just be a business arrangement. 2 years, and then we'd both move on with our lives. But in those 2 years, I could get certified on commercial aircraft, build the flight hours I need, maybe even get hired by a major airline." Ellen studied her granddaughter's face carefully. "And what about love, Maya? What about finding someone who sees your worth without needing to be taught?" "Love is a luxury I can't afford right now," Maya said quietly. "You need medical care that our insurance doesn't cover. We're behind on rent. I'm working 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, and it's still not enough." Ellen sighed, understanding the weight of responsibility Maya felt. The older woman had tried to hide how much her treatments cost, but Maya had seen the bills. Without help, Ellen's health would continue to deteriorate, and Maya would eventually be forced to choose between her grandmother's care and their basic survival. "If you do this," Ellen said slowly, "promise me that you won't lose yourself in the process. Don't let his wealth or his world change who you are inside." Maya squeezed her grandmother's hand. "I promise. And, Grandma, I won't sign anything until you meet him. If you don't approve, I'll find another way." Ellen nodded, satisfied with that condition. "Then, invite him for dinner tomorrow night. I want to see this man for myself before my granddaughter agrees to marry him, even if it's just on paper." The next morning, Maya called Alexander to extend her grandmother's invitation. She could hear the surprise in his voice when she explained that Ellen wanted to meet him before Maya would consider his proposal. "Dinner at your apartment?" Alexander asked, clearly uncertain about the idea. "Yes, nothing fancy, just my grandmother's cooking and a chance for her to get to know you." Maya paused. "Unless you're too important to eat in a small apartment?" "No, of course not," Alexander replied quickly. I haven't had a home-cooked meal in someone's kitchen in years." "Then, it's time you remembered what that's like," Maya said. 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And Alexander, don't bring any of your assistants or security team. Come alone." The following evening, Alexander stood outside Maya's apartment building, holding a bouquet of flowers and feeling more nervous than he had before any business meeting in his life. The building was modest and well-maintained, but clearly built for working families rather than wealthy executives. Maya answered the door wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking more relaxed than she had during their previous meetings. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. The apartment was small but clean and comfortable, filled with photographs and personal touches that made it feel like a real home. Alexander noticed pictures of Maya at various ages, often standing beside small aircraft with an elderly man who must have been her grandfather. Ellen emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She was smaller than Alexander had expected, but her presence filled the room with a quiet authority that reminded him of his own grandmother, who had died when he was young. "Mr. Blackwood," Ellen said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Chun. These are for you," Alexander replied, offering the flowers. Ellen accepted the bouquet graciously. "Please, call me Ellen. And you must be hungry. I've made enough food to feed an army." As they sat down to dinner, Alexander found himself in a completely unfamiliar situation. The kitchen table was small and intimate, nothing like the formal dining rooms where he usually entertained. Ellen had prepared a simple but delicious meal of roasted chicken, rice, and vegetables from her small garden plot behind the building. The conversation started slowly, with Ellen asking polite questions about Alexander's business and background. But as the evening progressed, her questions became more probing, designed to understand his character rather than his accomplishments. "Maya tells me you offered to help with my medical expenses," Ellen said during the main course. "That's very generous. But I wonder why a man would offer to help strangers. Alexander set down his fork, recognizing that this was an important moment. Honestly, Mrs. Chun, Ellen, it started as a way to make my proposal more attractive to Maya. But after seeing how she's sacrificed to take care of you, how hard she works just to keep up with your bills, I realized that helping you isn't just about convincing her to marry me. It's the right thing to do. Ellen nodded thoughtfully. And what do you hope to gain from this arrangement with my granddaughter? Alexander considered his answer carefully. He could give Ellen the same business reasons he had given Maya, but something about the older woman's direct gaze made him want to be more honest. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear, he said slowly. People who agree with everything I say because of my money or my power. Maya is the first person in years who has challenged me, who has shown me that my assumptions about people can be completely wrong. That sounds like you want to use her to feel better about yourself, Ellen observed bluntly. Alexander winced. Maybe that's part of it. But I also I hope that I have something to offer her too. Not just money, but opportunities, experiences, access to a world that could help her achieve her dreams. Ellen was quiet for several minutes, studying Alexander's face while Maya watched anxiously. Finally, the older woman spoke again. Maya's grandfather was a pilot, Ellen said. He was also a man who never had the opportunities his talent deserved because of prejudice and circumstances beyond his control. He made me promise that if Maya inherited his love of flying, I would do everything in my power to help her pursue it. Alexander nodded, beginning to understand the weight of what Ellen was considering. If you marry my granddaughter, even in name only, you become responsible for her well-being, Ellen continued. Not just financially, but emotionally. She's sacrificed her own dreams to take care of me. If you give her hope and then disappoint her, you'll break something in her that money can't fix. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Alexander felt the full weight of Ellen's expectations, and he realized that this was perhaps the first time in his adult life that someone had held him accountable for how his actions would affect another person. I understand, he said quietly, and I promise that whatever happens between Maya and me, I'll never do anything to hurt her or take advantage of her trust. Ellen studied his face for another long moment, then nodded slowly. Maya is stronger than she knows, she said. She can handle your world if she chooses to. The question is whether you can handle hers. After dinner, Maya walked Alexander to the door while Ellen cleaned up in the kitchen. They stood in the hallway outside the apartment, the sounds of other families going about their evening routines echoing around them. Your grandmother is remarkable, Alexander said sincerely. I can see where you get your strength. Maya smiled. She likes you, I think. She wouldn't have said what she did about me being strong enough for your world if she didn't approve. Alexander felt relieved, though he wasn't entirely sure why Ellen's approval mattered so much to him. So, does this mean you'll consider my proposal? I've already decided, Maya said, surprising him. I'll marry you, Alexander. But I have some conditions of my own to add to your contract. Alexander raised an eyebrow, such as, first, my grandmother's medical care is the top priority. Any treatment she needs, anywhere in the world, no matter what it costs. Agreed. Second, I want to continue working while I pursue flight training. I won't be completely dependent on you financially. Alexander started to object. Maya, there's no need for you to work. I can provide for everything you need. That's exactly why I need to keep working, Maya said firmly. I've never been dependent on anyone except myself, and I don't want to start now. I'll fulfill my obligations as your wife for social events and business functions, but I need to maintain my own identity too. Alexander considered this, realizing that her independence was part of what had attracted his respect in the first place. All right, we can work something out. Third, when our 2 years are up, I want help getting established in whatever career I choose. Not just money, but connections, recommendations, whatever support you can provide to help me build an independent life. Of course, Maya took a deep breath before stating her final condition. And I want you to donate another $5 million to scholarships for flight training, specifically for women and minorities who wouldn't otherwise have access to aviation careers. Alexander was quiet for a moment, calculating the total cost of Maya's conditions. The amount was significant even for someone with his wealth. but he found himself admiring her negotiation skills and her commitment to helping others. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. Maya shook his hand, sealing their unusual agreement. "I'll want to review the contract with my own lawyer before signing anything." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Alexander replied. "Maya, I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to make this arrangement work for both of us." As Alexander left the building and walked toward his waiting car, he found himself thinking about the evening he had just spent. The small apartment, the home-cooked meal, the honest conversation with people who weren't impressed by his wealth or status. It had been more genuine than most of his social interactions in years. Meanwhile, Maya returned to the kitchen where Ellen was finishing the dishes. "Are you sure about this, child?" Ellen asked without turning around. Maya picked up a dish towel and began drying the plates her grandmother handed her. "As sure as I can be about something this crazy. He's not what I expected, Grandma. There's something real underneath all that wealth and arrogance." Ellen nodded thoughtfully. "People can change, Maya. Sometimes they just need the right motivation. But remember what I said about not losing yourself in his world." "I won't," Maya promised. "If anything, I think I might help him find something real in his world too." Over the next week, lawyers worked on drafting the marriage contract while Maya and Alexander met several times to discuss the practical details of their arrangement. Maya was surprised to find that Alexander listened to her input and seemed genuinely interested in her perspectives on various issues. The media attention continued to be intense, with reporters and photographers following both of them whenever they appeared in public. Maya found the constant scrutiny exhausting, but Alexander helped her navigate the attention with patience and understanding. The wedding itself would be small and private, followed by a public reception that would satisfy the media's interest while allowing them to control the narrative around their relationship. Maya insisted that Ellen be involved in all the planning, and Alexander found himself enjoying the older woman's practical wisdom and dry sense of humor. As the wedding date approached, both Maya and Alexander began to realize that the morning of her wedding, Maya stood in front of the mirror in the luxury hotel suite Alexander had arranged for her preparation, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. The wedding dress was elegant but simple, chosen with Ellen's help to reflect Maya's personality rather than Alexander's wealth. Her hair was styled professionally, and subtle makeup enhanced her natural features without making her look like someone else entirely. Ellen sat in a nearby chair, watching her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "You look beautiful, dear," she said softly. "But, more importantly, you look like yourself." Maya smiled at her grandmother's reflection in the mirror. "I was worried I might disappear under all this." She gestured at the luxury surrounding them. "But somehow it still feels like me." The wedding ceremony was taking place in the garden of Alexander's family estate, a sprawling property that had been in the Blackwood family for 3 generations. Maya had visited once during the planning process and had been overwhelmed by the grandeur, but Alexander had worked to make the event feel personal rather than ostentatious. Jessica knocked on the door before entering, carrying Maya's bouquet. As the maid of honor, she had been by Maya's side throughout the whirlwind weeks of preparation. "The guests are seated," she reported. "Alexander's family arrived about an hour ago, and let me just say, they look exactly as intimidating as you'd expect." Maya felt her stomach tighten with nervousness. She had met Alexander's parents briefly during the engagement announcement, and the encounter had been politely hostile. His mother, Victoria Blackwood, was a formidable woman who made no effort to hide her disapproval of her son's choice in bride. His father, Richard, was more reserved but equally skeptical about the unusual circumstances of the marriage. "They'll come around," Ellen said calmly, though Maya suspected her grandmother was being optimistic for her benefit. When it was time for the ceremony, Maya walked down the aisle between rows of white chairs filled with Alexander's business associates, society friends, and a few carefully selected family members. The guest list was small by Billionaire standards, but still intimidating to someone who had grown up in modest circumstances. Alexander waited at the altar in a perfectly tailored black suit, and Maya was surprised by the genuine smile that crossed his face when he saw her approaching. Over the past weeks of planning and preparation, they had spent considerable time together, and Maya had discovered layers to his personality that contradicted her initial impressions. The ceremony was performed by a judge who was a family friend, keeping the religious elements minimal as neither Maya nor Alexander was particularly devout. They had written their own vows, and while both understood the practical nature of their arrangement, they had agreed to speak words that acknowledged their commitment to making their partnership successful. When Alexander spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sincere. Maya, you've already changed my life in ways I never expected. You've challenged me to be better, to see beyond my own limited perspective, and to understand that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status. I promise to support your dreams, to treat you with respect, and to be a partner you can count on. Maya felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion as she responded. Alexander, this journey we're beginning isn't what either of us planned, but I believe we can build something meaningful together. I promise to be honest with you, to help you see the world from different perspectives, and to work with you to create a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was brief and respectful, more a seal of their agreement than a romantic gesture. But Maya was surprised by the warmth she felt in that moment, and the genuine happiness in Alexander's eyes. The reception was held in an elegant pavilion on the estate grounds, with dinner and dancing under strings of lights that transformed the space into something magical. Maya found herself genuinely enjoying the evening, despite her nervousness about interacting with Alexander's social circle. During their first dance, Alexander proved to be surprisingly graceful, leading her smoothly around the dance floor while guests watched, and photographers captured the moment for the society pages. How are you holding up? He asked quietly as they swayed to the music. Better than I expected, Maya admitted. Your friends have been more welcoming than I thought they would be. They're curious about you, Alexander said with a slight smile. Most of them have never met anyone who challenged me the way you did. They're probably wondering what kind of woman can make Alexander Blackwood reconsider his entire worldview. Maya laughed. Have I really done that? Alexander's expression grew more serious. More than you know. Maya, I want you to understand that regardless of how this arrangement started, I'm committed to making it work. Not just the contract terms, but the partnership itself. Before Maya could respond, the music ended and other guests moved onto the dance floor. The evening continued with toasts, dinner, and conversation that was more pleasant than Maya had anticipated. Even Victoria Blackwood seemed to warm slightly toward her new daughter-in-law as the night progressed, though Maya suspected it was more about public appearance than genuine acceptance. The next morning, Maya moved her belongings into Alexander's penthouse apartment, a stunning space that occupied the top 2 floors of a downtown skyscraper. The apartment was beautifully designed but felt more like a luxury hotel than a home, with expensive art on the walls and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than a place where people actually lived. Alexander gave her a tour, showing her the guest suite that would serve as her private space, complete with its own bathroom and sitting area. The suite was larger than the entire apartment she had shared with Ellen, and Maya felt overwhelmed by the luxury. You can redecorate however you'd like, Alexander offered, noticing her uncertain expression. I want you to be comfortable here. Maya nodded, though she wondered how she could ever feel at home in such an opulent space. What about Ellen? You said she could visit whenever she wanted. There's a guest room on the lower level that she can use anytime she wants to stay over. And I've arranged for a car service to bring her here whenever she'd like to visit. Alexander paused. Maya, I meant what I said about this being a partnership. This is your home now too. Over the following weeks, Maya began adjusting to her new life as Alexander's wife. The changes were dramatic and sometimes overwhelming. She attended social events where she met politicians, celebrities, and business leaders whose names she had only seen in newspapers. She learned to navigate conversations about topics she had never considered important, and she discovered that many of the people in Alexander's world were more interesting and complex than she had expected. At the same time, Alexander kept his promise about her flight training. He enrolled her in an accelerated commercial pilot program at his company's training facility, where she worked with instructors who had flown for major airlines and military services. The opportunity was everything Maya had dreamed of, and She threw herself into the intensive training with enthusiasm. The training was challenging both intellectually and physically. Maya studied navigation, meteorology, aircraft systems, and federal aviation regulations. She spent hours in flight simulators practicing emergency procedures and learning to fly larger, more complex aircraft than anything she had piloted before. Her instructors were initially skeptical of the young woman who had married their boss, assuming she was a wealthy dilettante playing at being a pilot. But Maya's skills and dedication quickly earned their respect. She approached every lesson with the same focus and determination that had carried her through her grandfather's training years earlier. Alexander often stopped by the training facility to observe Maya's progress, and the instructors were surprised by his genuine interest in her development as a pilot. They had expected him to treat her training as an expensive hobby, but he clearly took her aviation goals seriously. "She's one of the most natural pilots I've ever taught," Maya's primary instructor, Captain Rodriguez, told Alexander after a particularly successful simulator session. Her grandfather taught her well. With the right opportunities, she could fly for any major airline. Alexander felt a surge of pride that surprised him. Maya's success in training wasn't just fulfilling their contract terms. It was validating his growing belief that she was capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. Meanwhile, Maya was discovering that her presence in Alexander's life was having effects she hadn't anticipated. His business meetings were different when she attended, with Alexander asking questions about how corporate decisions would affect employees and communities. His charitable giving became more focused on practical needs rather than just prestigious causes that would enhance his social standing. The change was most noticeable in his interactions with employees and service staff. Alexander began acknowledging people he had previously ignored, learning names, asking about personal situations. Maya realized that her influence was helping him develop empathy and awareness that his privileged upbringing had never required. Their relationship was evolving as well. What had started as a formal arrangement was becoming a genuine friendship. They ate dinner together most evenings, sharing stories about their days and discussing everything from aviation technology to social issues. Alexander proved to be an intelligent and thoughtful conversationalist when he wasn't performing for his social circle. Maya found herself looking forward to their conversations, and she was surprised by how much she enjoyed Alexander's company when he let down his guard. He was funnier than she had expected, with a dry sense of humor that reminded her of her grandmother. He was also more vulnerable than his public persona suggested, sometimes sharing doubts about his business decisions or concerns about living up to his father's legacy. One evening, about 2 months after their wedding, they were having dinner on the penthouse terrace when Alexander brought up a subject that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about your scholarship program," he said, referring to the aviation scholarships that had been part of their marriage agreement. "I'd like to expand it beyond what we originally discussed." Maya looked up from her salad with interest. "What do you mean?" "I want to create a full aviation academy," Alexander explained. "Not just scholarships for flight training, but a comprehensive program that includes academic education, internships with airlines and aerospace companies, and guaranteed job placement for graduates." Maya set down her fork, staring at him in amazement. "Alexander, that would cost millions of dollars." "I can afford it," he said simply. "But more than that, I think it's the right thing to do. Watching you train, seeing how much talent is out there waiting for the right opportunity, it's made me realize that my company should be doing more to develop new pilots rather than just hiring them away from competitors." Maya felt her heart race with excitement at the possibilities Alexander was describing. "We could target underserved communities, provide not just training, but also support services to help students succeed." "Exactly," Alexander agreed, his enthusiasm matching hers. "Maya, I'd like you to help me develop this program, not just as a consultant, but as a partner. You understand what barriers exist for people trying to enter aviation, and you know what kind of support would make the biggest difference." Maya realized that Alexander was offering her something more valuable than money or opportunities for herself. He was inviting her to help create pathways for others who shared her dreams, but faced even greater obstacles. 6 months into their marriage, Maya received her commercial pilot's license with flying colors, achieving scores that put her in the top 5% of all test takers. The ceremony was small but meaningful, held at the training facility where she had spent countless hours preparing for this moment. Alexander attended the graduation, along with Ellen, Jessica, and several of Maya's instructors who had become genuine admirers of her skill and dedication. As Maya received her license, Alexander felt a pride that surprised him with its intensity. This wasn't just about fulfilling their contract. He was genuinely happy for her success. After the ceremony, as they celebrated with dinner at a restaurant near the training facility, Maya found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been working multiple jobs just to pay bills, with no realistic hope of pursuing her aviation dreams. Now she was a licensed commercial pilot with opportunities that most people could only dream of. But the changes went deeper than professional success. Living with Alexander had revealed sides of his personality that contradicted everything she had initially believed about him. Behind the arrogant billionaire facade was a man who was genuinely trying to become better, to use his privilege more responsibly, and to understand perspectives he had never considered before. Their aviation academy project had become a consuming passion for both of them. They had spent weeks traveling to underserved communities, meeting with potential students, and developing partnerships with schools and community organizations. Maya had discovered that Alexander was surprisingly good at connecting with young people once he stopped trying to impress them and simply listened to their dreams and concerns. The academy was scheduled to open in 3 months, with its first class of 30 students selected from over 2,000 applicants. Maya would serve as the director of student services, while Alexander handled the business operations and fundraising. Working together on the project had brought them closer than either had anticipated. But their growing partnership was about to face its biggest test. One evening in early spring, Maya was working late in the penthouse office they had set up for the academy project when she received a call that would change everything. The caller was a reporter from a major business magazine who had been investigating Alexander's company for a story about corporate responsibility. "Miss Chun, I'm calling because I've uncovered some information that I think you should know about," the reporter said. "It concerns your husband's motivations for marrying you." Maya felt her stomach drop. "What kind of information? Are you aware that your marriage to Mr. Blackwood triggered a clause in his father's will that gave him control of a trust fund worth over $50 million? A trust that was specifically designed to encourage him to settle down and start a family." Maya sat down heavily, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "I don't know what you're talking about. According to documents I've obtained, Mr. Blackwood was facing a deadline to marry before his 29th birthday or forfeit access to the trust fund permanently. His birthday was just 2 weeks after your wedding. Ms. Chun, it appears that your husband's proposal may have been motivated by financial necessity rather than the romantic story that's been reported in the media." After the reporter hung up, Maya sat in the office staring at her hands, trying to process what she had learned. Everything about their relationship suddenly seemed different, colored by the possibility that Alexander had manipulated her for financial gain. When Alexander returned home that evening, he found Maya waiting for him in the living room, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said simply. Alexander immediately sensed something was wrong. Over the months of their marriage, he had learned to read Maya's moods, and the careful control in her voice indicated serious trouble. "What's happened?" he asked, sitting across from her. Maya told him about the reporter's call, watching Alexander's face carefully as she related the details about the trust fund and the deadline. As she spoke, she saw something in his expression that confirmed her worst fears. The reporter had been telling the truth. When she finished, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Alexander spoke, his voice quiet and strained. "It's true," he said. "The trust fund exists, and the deadline was real." Maya felt her heart break a little at his admission. "So this was all about money? Our entire relationship, the marriage, everything we've built together?" "No," Alexander said quickly, leaning forward in his chair. "Maya, please let me explain. Yes, the trust fund was a factor when I made the original challenge. I was facing the deadline, and I was desperate to find a solution that didn't involve marrying someone from my social circle just for convenience. So you decided to humiliate a waitress into marrying you instead?" Alexander winced at the accusation. "That's not how it happened. The challenge was impulsive, born from arrogance, and stupidity. But, Maya, you have to believe me when I tell you that everything we've built since then has been real. Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights while she tried to sort through her emotions. How can I believe anything you say now? How do I know that the academy, the flight training, all of it wasn't just part of some elaborate scheme to keep me happy while you secured your inheritance? Because I didn't need to do any of that to access the trust fund, Alexander said, his voice growing stronger. The marriage was enough to satisfy the terms of my father's will. Everything else, the academy, the scholarships, supporting your training beyond what we originally agreed to, all of that was because I wanted to do it. Maya turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But you lied to me. For 6 months, you let me believe that you had chosen to challenge me purely out of arrogance, that our agreement was just about your business image. You never told me that you were facing a financial deadline. Alexander stood up, running his hands through his hair in frustration. You're right. I should have told you about the trust fund from the beginning. I was ashamed of it, Maya. I was ashamed that my father had manipulated me even from the grave, that I had allowed myself to be forced into marriage by financial pressure. So instead, you manipulated me. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Alexander couldn't deny its truth. Yes, he said quietly, I did, and I've regretted it every day since, because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about the trust fund and started being about you. Maya shook her head. I can't do this, Alexander. I can't be in a relationship built on lies and manipulation, no matter how it might have evolved. Maya, please, Alexander said, desperation creeping into his voice. What we have now is real. The way I feel about you, the partnership we've built, the work we're doing together, none of that has anything to do with my father's trust fund. The way you feel about me? Maya repeated. We've never even talked about feelings, Alexander. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, remember? Alexander took a step toward her, his usual composure completely gone. That's because I've been afraid to admit that it stopped being just business months ago. Maya, I'm in love with you. The words seemed to surprise Alexander as much as they did Maya. For a moment, neither of them moved, the weight of his confession settling between them. You're in love with me, Maya said slowly. But you've never trusted me enough to tell me the truth about why you married me in the first place. Alexander saw the pain in her eyes and realized that his declaration of love had come too late, tainted by the deception that had preceded it. Maya, I know I've handled this terribly, but please don't let my mistakes destroy what we've built together. Maya walked past him toward the door of the office. I need time to think, she said. I'm going to stay with Ellen for a few days. Maya, wait, Alexander called after her, but she was already gone. The next 3 days were the longest of Alexander's life. He threw himself into work on the academy, partly as a distraction and partly because he realized that the project might be the only connection to Maya he had left. He found himself thinking constantly about their months together, reliving conversations and moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now felt precious. Ellen answered the door when Alexander arrived at Maya's old apartment building on the 4th day. The older woman's expression was stern but not entirely unwelcoming. She doesn't want to see you, Ellen said directly. I understand, Alexander replied. But would you give her this? He handed Ellen a thick envelope. It's not what you might think. Please ask her to read it. Ellen accepted the envelope with obvious reluctance. Alexander, my granddaughter has been hurt before. Her parents died when she was young, and she's learned to be very careful about trusting people. If you've broken that trust. I know, Alexander said quietly. I know I've made terrible mistakes. But I love her, Ellen, and I think the work we're doing together matters too much to let my stupidity destroy it. That evening, Maya reluctantly opened the envelope Alexander had sent. Inside was a legal document that took her several minutes to understand fully. When she finally grasped what she was reading, she called Ellen into the room. Grandma, look at this, Maya said, spreading the documents on the kitchen table. Ellen put on her reading glasses and studied the papers carefully. Is this what I think it is? Maya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander has transferred the entire trust fund into an endowment for the Aviation Academy. All $53 million. and he's legally removed himself from any control over the money. Ellen looked up at her granddaughter. What does this mean? It means he's given up the inheritance that was supposedly so important to him. He's ensuring that the academy will be financially secure forever, and he's done it in a way that makes it legally impossible for him to benefit from the money personally. Maya stared at the documents, trying to understand what Alexander's gesture meant. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was a demonstration that his commitment to their work together went far beyond financial considerations. The next day, Maya returned to the penthouse. She found Alexander in their office, working on academy enrollment materials with an intensity that suggested he was using work to avoid thinking about their relationship. Thank you, she said from the doorway. Alexander looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. For what? For the endowment. For making sure the academy will succeed regardless of what happens between us. Alexander set down his pen and turned to face her fully. Maya, I need you to understand something. I did make the original challenge because I was desperate about the trust fund deadline. But everything that happened after that first flight, everything we've built together, has been real. Maya came into the office and sat down across from him. I believe that you believe that, Alexander. But how can I trust my own feelings when I know our entire relationship started with deception? Because you know me now, Alexander said simply. You've seen who I am when I'm not trying to impress anyone or protect my image. You've seen me learn and change and become a better person because of your influence. That's real, Maya. That's not something money can buy or manipulation can create. Maya was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. The reporter who called me is planning to run the story about the trust fund. Once that happens, everyone will know the real reason you married me. Alexander nodded. I know. My lawyers have been trying to manage the situation, but I've told them not to suppress the story. People have a right to know the truth. Even if it damages your business reputation, my reputation isn't worth preserving if it's built on lies, Alexander said. I've learned that much from you. Maya felt something shift inside her as she listened to his words. The man sitting across from her was not the same arrogant billionaire who had humiliated her at a charity event less than a year ago. He had become someone capable of growth, of admitting mistakes, of putting principle above self-interest. I've been thinking about our contract, Maya said finally. The 2-year term, the divorce clause, all of it. Alexander's expression grew guarded. And I want to renegotiate. Alexander waited, afraid to hope for what she might be proposing. Maya took a deep breath before continuing. I don't want a marriage with a predetermined end date. I don't want a relationship based on contracts and business arrangements. If we're going to be together, I want it to be because we choose each other every day, not because we signed papers promising to pretend for 2 years. Alexander felt his heart race. What are you saying, Maya? I'm saying that despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation and the terrible beginning, I've fallen in love with the man you've become. And if you meant what you said about loving me, then I want us to start over. Really start over, with complete honesty between us. Alexander stood up so quickly that his chair rolled backward. Maya, are you sure? After everything I've put you through. Maya stood as well, moving closer to him. I'm sure that the work we do together matters. I'm sure that you've become a better person since we've been married. And I'm sure that I love you, not because of any contract or arrangement, but because of who you are when you let yourself be real. Alexander reached for her hands, holding them gently. I love you too, Maya. Not because you challenged me or changed me or helped my public image. I love you because you're brave and smart and kind, and because you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. When Alexander kissed her this time, it was nothing like their polite wedding kiss or the careful pecks they had shared at social events. It was the kiss of two people who had found their way to love through an unlikely path, who had built something real from the most artificial beginning. As they held each other in the office they had created together, surrounded by plans for the academy that would help others achieve their dreams, both Maya and Alexander understood that their story was really just beginning. They had started with a challenge born from arrogance and desperation, but they had created a partnership built on love, trust, and shared purpose. The Aviation Academy opened 6 months later to national attention, partly because of the media coverage of Maya and Alexander's unusual love story. The first class of students included young people from backgrounds similar to Maya's, all of them given opportunities they never could have accessed without the Academy's support. Maya served as the Academy's director, using her own experience to help students navigate the challenges of aviation training and career development. Alexander continued to run his business empire, but with a perspective transformed by his understanding of what it meant to work for something bigger than personal success. Their marriage, which had begun as a publicity stunt and financial necessity, had become a true partnership. They had learned that love could grow from the most unlikely circumstances, and that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. Ellen, watching her granddaughter and son-in-law work together to change lives through aviation education, often reflected that sometimes the best stories were the ones that started with the worst possible beginnings. Maya and Alexander had proven that with honesty, commitment, and the willingness to grow, even the most artificial relationship could become beautifully, authentically real. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I want to be part of this." As they continued discussing the details of the Aviation Academy, Maya realized that her marriage to Alexander was becoming something neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a practical arrangement was evolving into a true partnership, with shared goals and mutual respect that went far beyond their original contract. Neither was ready to acknowledge it yet, but both Maya and Alexander were beginning to care about each other in ways that had nothing to do with their business agreement. The foundation of their relationship was shifting from convenience to something that looked surprisingly like the beginning of love. Their relationship was becoming more complex than either had anticipated. What had started as a purely business arrangement was developing into something that resembled a real partnership, built on mutual respect and shared goals. Neither was ready to admit it yet, but both were beginning to wonder if their marriage of convenience might become something more genuine than either had originally planned. As Maya headed home to talk with her grandmother, she found herself considering not just the practical benefits of Alexander's offer, but the possibility that she might actually be able to help someone learn to see beyond their privilege and prejudices. It was a challenge that appealed to her almost as much as the opportunity to pursue her dreams of flying. The story of Maya Chun and Alexander Blackwood was just beginning, and neither of them could predict where it would ultimately lead. Alexander sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the full magnitude of what had just happened. The woman he had tried to humiliate had not only met his challenge, but had exceeded every expectation. She had flown his aircraft better than some professional pilots he had hired. As they prepared to face the waiting media, both Maya and Alexander knew that their lives had just changed forever. What had started as a cruel joke had become a binding agreement, and neither of them was quite sure what would happen next. The reporters were already shouting questions as they climbed down from the aircraft, but Maya felt a strange sense of calm. She had proven herself, shown the world that she was far more than anyone had assumed. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage and determination that had gotten her through the challenge. Alexander, walking beside her toward the crowd of journalists, realized that he was about to learn a hard lesson about making assumptions and underestimating people. The young woman he had dismissed as insignificant had just turned his entire world upside down, and he was beginning to suspect that his life would never be the same again.